Welcome everyone to Wetland Wednesday number 3 in our MarshWatch program. This is going to be bird session number 2. Click on the slides, that'll make them go. Okay. Before we get started, I'd just like to say that I'm joining you today from Saskatoon, located on Treaty 6 territory, which encompasses traditional lands of the Cree, Dakota, Nakota, Saulteaux, and Stoney First Nations, as well as the homeland of the Métis. And in case this is your first time here this evening, my name's Leanne Latremoy, and I work for Birds Canada. It's a nonprofit organization with a mission to drive action to increase the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of birds in Canada. And I do genuinely love wetlands and wetland birds. I've spent a lot of my career thus far tromping around all kinds of bogs, sloughs, wetlands of all kinds, most of the time with a smile on my face. Sometimes it's harder than others, but I find wetlands fascinating, and hopefully through this journey, if you aren't already fascinated by them, you'll gain an appreciation for them. So what's on the agenda for tonight? We're going to do just a really brief review of the birds we covered last week, and then we're going to go over several birds and frogs this week. At the end of it, I'll share my contact information. Afterwards, I'm going to stop the recording, and then we're going to go through some quizzes. There'll be chance for discussion if you have any questions, if you want to share sightings, if you managed to get out and try to practice some of the species we saw last week. I want to hear about it. But that session, or that portion of the recording is not, that portion of the session is not going to be recorded. And we will have quizzes available online. I posted one last week. It got up on Saturday, so if you want to go and review those birds from last week, there is a quiz there, and I've got for several of the questions, there's guidance if you choose the wrong answer. So go ahead and try those. I'm going to keep those quizzes, I think, mostly to each session, but I think what I'm going to do is every several sessions, I'm going to throw in a review quiz that's going to be all of the species that we've covered so far, or at least choosing from all the species that we've covered so far. So there'll be a range of ID quizzes available afterwards for you to go do at your own pace and check to see that you're on track for learning your birds. Okay. Well, what did we get up to last week? Well, we met the Canada goose, the mallard, the northern shoveler, the yellow-headed blackbird, the red-winged blackbird, the sora, the boreal chorus frog, and the wood frog. Just go over a couple of those recordings just so that it really drives it home. And I think everyone's pretty familiar with the Canada goose, but I'll play that one anyway. And at this point, you might even be hearing the bird in the background, which is a red-winged blackbird. Anyway, the Canada goose does a kind of that classic honking that we're familiar with. The mallard definitely does a standardized quack, 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 but just note that lots of females of other species also quack, so it's not the greatest diagnostic tool for identifying a mallard, but if you hear quack, 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 look in that direction and you might see a mallard. The northern shoveler, on the other hand, the males have a really identifiable suk suk, suk suk call, and I just love hearing it because they'll do it a fair bit, especially as they're flying around or, noodling around in a wetland. I like hearing this one. The yellow-headed blackbird, on the other hand, has a very grating sound. If you ever, really get interested in bird songs, you can actually look at sounds on a time axis and a frequency axis, and this one just spans the whole spectrum, and you can hear that really loud wah. They're not the most musical of birds, but it's definitely a distinctive sound. So a lot of those kind of grating noises coming from the wetland, but this is also a pretty obvious bird. They're going to be singing. Usually you can see them, and that yellow head just really shines, and especially if you get the really, nice light on them, they're such a gorgeous bird. The red-winged blackbird is going to be familiar to many of you, and that does the classic conqueree, as well as some lots of other blackbirdy type noises, but one of the classic ones is a loud kind of C call. Conqueree. The Sora is one that it's really, really useful to learn the songs and calls of. Soras are usually fairly secretive in nature. They're going to be moving around the wetland vegetation, and they're also super, super vocal. If you happen to be pulling up next to a wetland and you slam your car door a little too loud, this will often set off the Soras in the wetland. They are just very territorial, so any loud noise, and they're going to be letting you know that they're there. So two of the most common calls are the whinny, which I'll play first. And sometimes that whinny can go on for a fairly long time. And if you get lots of birds in the same wetland that are all calling, sometimes, one's whinny will set off another, and you'll just get this kind of cascade of whinny sounds, and it's pretty incredible. Another one that they do a lot is called the perweep. It's a much shorter call, and it kind of rises in pitch. Oh, somehow that changed to the next slide. Oops, let's go back. Okay, there we go. Perweep, perweep. And the two amphibians that we covered last week are boreal chorus frog. Remember, it's got the stripe that goes through the eye and then travels down the body, and it's roughly got 3 lines that are either solid or more often broken up to some extent down its back. And that base color varies quite wildly. But the sound, it sounds like you're rubbing a fingernail over the teeth of a comb. And that's multiple individuals going there. That's not just one frog. The wood frog, on the other hand, it has a chestnutty patch behind the eye. There is a bit of an eye line there, but it doesn't extend down the side of the body like it does in the chorus frog. It's just got that bold kind of wedge patch on, behind the eye. Is a really good defining feature. It's another one that can have very variable body color. Some individuals also have a white line down the center, and most of them that I've seen at least don't tend to have that. The wood frog, most of the time when people are trying to describe it, they say, what is that thing that sounds like a duck in my wetland? And they can obviously see no ducks in their wetland. That's the wood frog. It sounds like harsh quacks. So that waka, 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 waka. Okay, and those were our suspects from last week. What are we going to cover this week, you might be wondering? Well, we're going to do one duck. We'll cover the northern pintail, another rail. So this is a bird that's related to the Sora, the American coot. We'll cover 2 grebes, the redneck and the pied-billed. And we'll cover a couple of shorebirds, the killdeer, the American avocet, the black-necked stilt, as well as one more frog, the northern leopard frog. So without further ado, let's get introduced to the northern pintail. This is one of the more elegant ducks that we have. It's a medium-sized to large-sized dabbler, so it's going to be a little smaller than that mallard, but it's not going to be teeny tiny or anything. So it's going to be, slightly smaller, but still comparable in size to the mallard that you might see floating around. And it's a very swan-like duck, if you will. It's slender, it's long-necked, and it usually gets described as elegant. Most ducks don't have quite as long of a neck or, keep it up as often as the northern pintail does. They're just very sleek and elegant. The drake has a chestnutty brown head, and the thing that really stands out on this bird, like a lot of ducks, especially at a distance, is the white on the bird. And this is especially going to be for that neck and breast and that white spur that kind of travels up the side of the back of the neck. And you might not think that that's a really helpful identification clue, but that white spur, that white neck going up on that dark colored head is diagnostic for the northern pintail. So it's got plain face, but it's chestnut. It's got a long pointed tail. It's going to be a little fine black tail back there. The flanks are kind of this gray patch. There's a little bit of white near the rump as well, but overall broadside, it's going to be fairly gray. And it's got a sleek kind of black and blue bill. I really think their bills are quite handsome. The speculum, which is the colored portion of the wing, so down here, you can see my pointer, those colored feathers, those are actually the secondary feathers on the wing. Those are colored in a lot of dabbling species, and they can be quite diagnostic. So in the males, it's going to be green, but it's going to be bronzy in the female, which we'll see later. But both of them are going to be bordered with white below. The male's going to have a little bit of a kind of orangey beige color on the top, but that kind of green speculum with that white large white border at the bottom is going to define our male. And in flight, they really have this kind of elongated profile. Lots of people liken them to the old school lawn darts that people would throw. So they're quite sleek in profile as they're flying. So that's the drake, that's our male. And the hen, on the other hand, she is quite plain, but she is still quite lovely. So again, this shape thing, the slender and long necked is going to be helpful. And when you're just getting started, I like to tell this to people, when you're starting to identify ducks in general, start with the males and just really get familiar with their shape and their size. And start to learn the females by association, especially in the spring. They're going to be together, but don't rack your brains early on for female ducks, because they are a little bit challenging, as you might be gaining an appreciation for. So she's fairly plain overall. She's going to be mottled brown. And what's really striking actually is kind of really the lack of anything going on the face. It's a very plain face, which overall is warmer in tone than the rest of the duck's body. So it's going to be slightly more rich brown than the rest of her body. And she's going to have a dark bill. So that's going to be mostly like a grayish black color. The speculum, harder to see, easier to see in flight on this species. She's not quite like the mallard hen that's going to be showing you the speculum a lot, but it's quite bronzy, and again, that lined with white. And don't worry, we're gonna compare the females that we've covered so far. So that's the northern pintail. She's going to have that shape like the male, that long neck, usually slender proportions, really elegant species. What do they eat? Well, again, they're one of those surface feeding dabbling ducks, so they're not going to be diving underwater. They're a pretty generalist species. They'll be eating seeds and grains, tubers, vegetative parts of aquatic plants, and they'll also, of course, eat invertebrates, especially during the breeding season when they're, when the females are producing eggs, when the young are growing. They're really going to be eating a fair bit of invertebrates just to bulk up on that protein. So this includes insects, snails, crustaceans, earthworms. And this is really a duck of, the open country, the grasslandy areas. You'll see them still in the parkland or in treed areas, but they're really much more frequent in areas that have, adjacent grassland for nesting. They really tend to like to nest in lovely meadowy, grassy areas. So this is definitely a grassland species. Don't focus too much on the sound for this species, because I don't find that they tend to make a lot of noise compared to something like the northern shoveler, which is just, it does that sook sook a lot. So the sound that the male makes is going to be kind of toots along with this tent zipper sound. So imagine you've got a tent zipper and you're just like opening and closing it a whole bunch really fast. So hear those toots and zipper noises. So that's what your northern pintail sounds like, and they don't do that a ton, but just so you know what they sound like. This is another species with a circumpolar range, but they really, are found in a wide variety of locations compared to some of the other ones that we looked at that had circumpolar distributions. Let's focus in on the North American one, and you're going to find northern pintail all over the place. Doesn't really seem to like a lot of the shield country in northern Quebec and northern Ontario, but where most people live, northern pintail is definitely going to be a possibility. Okay, let's take a look at those hens so far because they can get a little bit tricky. We got our mallard, northern shoveler, and the northern pintail. The bill is a good place to focus on. The mallard is going to be orange with a dark center. The bill on the northern shoveler is orange and olive, but it's comically large. It's like a big spatula on the end of the bird's face. And especially you're seeing it here with a couple of other species. It really is just it's shoveled. It doesn't have that nice curve that a lot of the other species have. And it is quite large for its face. And on the northern pintail, this is going to be a dark bill. So if you're seeing some of these hens out there, this is some of the tricks to tell these three species apart. The speculum on the mallard is going to be that iridescent blue with a white border both above and below. On the northern shoveler, it's green with a white border above, and it's going to be bronzy with a white border below on the northern pintail. On the face, for the mallard, it's going to have a fairly strong eye line, and it's going to be a bit colder than the rest of the body. And the northern pintail, a very plain face, which has warmer tones than the rest of the body. So those are just a couple of our dabbling hens, and don't worry, once we get to be covering lots, we'll be going over them a fair bit. Okay, next up we have the American coot. I think this bird is hilarious and it always makes me laugh. So it's a large rail. If you remember last week, we did the sora, which is kind of secretive. It likes to walk around. It weaves in and out of the vegetation. The American coot is the opposite. It is very duck-like in its habits. It's going to be, you know, a rail that you see floating around on the water most of the time. It's very, very bold. And I find it acts like a water chicken. It's going to be bobbing its head back and forth. It's going to be making all kinds of little noises as it does all kinds of things. The sexes look identical in this species. They're both black overall. They've got white tail feathers, and they'll use those to signal in interactions with conspecifics, so other American coots. They've got this bright white bill. It's got a little bit of a ring at the end of the bill, and some of them have this quite prominent face frontal shield here with this red callus, but it's not as prominent as you might like it to be. But that black and white really stands out. There isn't going to be a duck that is solid black like this, or even a grebe that's just solid black with the white bill. So it's a pretty obvious bird. It definitely makes itself known. And especially out here on the prairies, this is going to be a common bird in most wetlands that have a little bit of depth to them. You'll see American coots moving all around. They have really interesting feet if you ever get to see them on land. They don't have webs, so they lack the webs that, say, ducks and geese have, but they have lobed feet so that they can paddle around kind of like a duck anyway. They're really, really quite interesting. And they make just a variety of noises. And these are actual, you know, names of these calls: burr up, hiccup, and the pop. I'll play this for you here. And they just make all kinds of hilarious poppy grunty noises. So that's the American coot noises. I'll play those again. Just really grunty. And they're just very, very chatty. They're bold, they're out in the open a lot, and they do make a lot of vocalizations. They also fight a fair bit, which is kind of fun to watch. They'll get very territorial, and they will have these little kicking matches where they'll, you know, get up onto their backs a little bit, and then they will use their feet to bat at the intruder if things escalate to that point. But oftentimes what they do, they can signal with those tail feathers. So like in the bottom left here, these are a couple of coots that have either, you know, they've just had an interaction with another pair of coots or another coot entering their territory, or it's usually if it's two coots signaling at each other, they'll be just turning their bums towards each other. So I'm tending to think that this is a pair, but they will fan out those little white tail feathers and use them to kind of signal like, okay, we're still agitated, but we don't want a physical confrontation, or the physical confrontation is over. Kind of funny little behaviors. They also have a tendency to, if they have a chick that is a little bit too demanding, they aren't the greatest parents. They will peck them on the head to stop them from begging so much. I feel like they're just stressed out parents that are sometimes having enough of their children's demands. So if you do see that, it is normal behavior for coots to be a little bit not nice towards their begging children. That's just nature. That's just how it is. In terms of diet, they're a surface feeder, so they're going to be pecking and dabbling at the water surface, and they're definitely omnivorous. They will eat plant matter year-round, pond weeds, sedges, algae, grasses, and they'll eat a lot of invertebrates as well, especially in the breeding season and when they're little. So insects, mollusks, crustaceans, tiny fish, little anything that they can really get their beaks on, they will chomp down for some protein. And the American coot has a wide North American distribution. You can be found across a fair bit of Canada and the US as well. Okay, next up we have two grebes, but I figured I would take this chance to talk a little bit about grebes in general. Grebes, on the whole, share a variety of characteristics. They're expert divers. This is really how they get their food. So in order to, be really good at diving, they've got their legs set very far back on their body. That's really good for propulsion, but it also makes them really awkward on land. Diving ducks also have their legs set far back, but these guys have their legs set even farther back. They can just barely get around a little bit on their nests. It is quite awkward, and we'll see a picture of a redneck grebe later on. They've all got pointed bills, and they all have relatively reduced tails, which results in some pretty fluffy bums. As you can see on the left-hand side here, there's just very, very reduced tail feathers. They also actually consume feathers, and this is thought to be in order to, line their stomachs. They do eat a lot of fish, and so they will pluck off body feathers and eat them and feed them to their young ones. And this is thought that it's going to help, keep fish bones in their stomach for longer, so that all of the stomach acids have time to dissolve the bones and they don't make it further down the digestive tract. This is speculated. It hasn't actually been proven, but that's what the thinking is for the consuming of feathers. They also brood their young on their back, so it's really cute to see. They'll pile their babies on their back. One parent will have the kids, and the other one will be busy diving, getting food, and feeding the chicks. It is pretty adorable to see. And they also all go through fairly elaborate courtship rituals, and they are rituals. They're pretty, they have these defined movements and postures and stuff that they go through. And I'll show you a couple of examples of some diagrams, but you'll have to travel onto YouTube and look up some cool grebe videos afterwards to get an idea. So first up, we have the red-necked grebe. This is one of our large grebes. It's also a very conspicuous and loud bird. It's got a nice long neck, and both sexes look pretty much the same. And the thing that really stands out on this bird when you see it, especially at a distance, is that shiny gray cheek patch. It just kind of reflects light back really good. And so you can see that white cheek patch, especially when that kind of red neck and dark body, if you don't have great light, that can kind of be hard to tell. So if you see it at a distance, that white cheek patch is really something to focus on. There isn't really anything else that's going to have one that's quite as extensive and has the same shape as the redneck grebe, along with the other features, that kind of relatively long pointed bill, and that 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 bright cheek patch really just stands right out. Otherwise, they do have a red neck and otherwise a large dark body. The bill itself is kind of yellowish with some black mixed in. It's never, bright yellow, but there's definitely enough yellow on it that it's usually visible. And this is going to be a bird that you'll find in large wetlands with open water and emergent vegetation. They'll also make themselves quite at home on lake margins that have emergent vegetation. They do enjoy large bodies of water, especially ones that they need to dive and feed in. So it's not going to be small, shallow wetlands. They do need a bit more space. And they're also quite vocal. So they do float around the lake a fair bit, but they do make this really interesting call. They call it a whinny braying call. I think of it as like maybe if you've got a cartoon stereotype, maybe like a redneck laughing from Looney Tunes or something. So let's play that whinny braying call. And that sound travels quite a distance, especially because, you do see them on larger bodies of water, and sound travels really well over water. If you've ever been fishing, you just don't want to tell secrets on the boat. Same with the birds, that sound just travels really well over the water. And this is a loud, kind of guttural, laughy sound that really travels a great distance. So it can usually tell, even if you're not even terribly close to the body of water, that there's redneck grebes on it. And those babies on the back are just some of the most adorable things. Grebe babies especially are just painfully cute. They've got these, black and white stripes that I just imagine they're wearing little cute striped pajamas. And they're just some of the most adorable things. I think this session today has the cutest babies in it. So you're in for some cuteness time here. These guys, as I mentioned, they're divers and they're pretty opportunistic. They'll be taking anything they can catch: fish, crustaceans, aquatic insects and their larvae, amphibians. And like I said, they're really awkward on land. And I was lucky enough to actually see some building a nest this weekend. And you're scanning the horizon that was far out, and I was like, what is this big hulking thing out on this lump in this wetland? And I get my binoculars on it, and sure enough, it's this big dark blob of a body of a redneck grebe. And they look so funny when they're out of the water. They're truly made for swimming and an aquatic lifestyle. They do build these great big platform nests. They'll be dragging wet, soggy vegetation. They'll build up these mounds in the wetlands, and they'll nest on them in really conspicuous places. And especially if you drive around the prairies, you'll see this a fair bit. Just this lump with a redneck grebe just sitting in the middle of it, in the middle of this wetland. Most other species tend to try to be a little bit more secretive than these guys in their nesting. I guess they figure they're pretty safe. They're kind of large. There's not a lot of things are going to swim out and try to get at their nests, so they just go for it. They look kind of funny. This big blob of a body, long, slender neck. It's just, I think they look a little bit goofy. And again, they have these just incredibly elaborate displays, which are, organized into different ceremonies that they have. So there's a discovery ceremony, there's a weed ceremony. The weed ceremonies are always funny. They'll in lots of groups, they'll pick up nesting material, and both pairs will have some nesting material, and they'll be showing it to each other, and they'll be, getting up out of the water, having their chests up and bumping chests and showing each other, see all of this great nesting material I'm capable of producing. Yes, I am the one you want to mate with. It is really fun to watch if you get them early in the season. So, and they'll be doing this kind of stuff right now. So if you get the chance to get out to wetlands that have grebes on them, I highly recommend it. It's really interesting. I'm mostly sharing this because I wanted to highlight just some of the silliness of the names. So all of these postures are, names. So this is how the discovery ceremony goes, and they'll be making calls at each other. So they'll do the winning and braying. Apparently there's a cat display, so they'll raise up their wings and tuck their heads. They've got a bouncy posture. The ghostly penguin display. When I was putting this together, I just started laughing. I thought this was hilarious. I think birders and ornithologists sometimes are just hilarious in their naming of things. So yeah, ghostly penguin display, penguin dance, um, parallel rushing. Anyway, so as you can see, there's fairly ritualized and elaborate courtship displays, and they'll do this, to strengthen their pair bond or to see if this potential mate might work. Like, oh, do I like dancing with this mate? Um, you know, just really interesting little bonding behaviors that they'll do. And this is another grebe with well, they've all been waterfowl so far that have circumpolar distributions, but this grebe also does as well. You can focus in here on the North American context. It's a bit more of a kind of central Western species. We don't get them on the East Coast very much at all, except in the winter months. So I feel like we're pretty lucky for waterfowl here on the prairies, and keep saying this, but if you wanna learn your waterfowl and your water birds, you got to come to the prairies. We've got them all, and we've got lots of them. Okay, the next grebe is the pied-billed grebe. In comparison to the redneck grebe, it's fairly different. It is a small, compact little grebe. It's got a very blocky head shape, and it's a very secretive little bird. The sexes are similar. They're kind of this gray-brown overall, and they've got this distinct thick bill that's kind of this whitish with a black ring around it. And that bill kind of connects to this whitish eye ring as well. And they have a little bit of a black chin, kind of hard to see, but overall that combination of brown, compact little bird it's fairly nondescript other than that bright bill, that bright whitish bill with that red, sorry, that black ring around it. That's really going to be quite diagnostic for it in the breeding season. And when I say secretive, these birds really, they're not going to be doing those elaborate displays out in the open. I've only ever once seen pied-billed grebes do a little bit of a ceremonial display. They do them, but they don't want to do it quite in view of people so much. And when they're disturbed, they do sort of like this funniest thing. So they're capable of adjusting their buoyancy by either, squeezing the air out of their feathers and allowing them to sink, or, getting a little bit of air in there and helping their buoyancy a little bit. So when they're feeling threatened, which can just be you walking up to a wetland, they'll either dive and stay underwater a long time, and usually they'll go to the other side of the wetland. Or if they really want to be sneaky about it, they'll just slowly sink out of sight. And you'll just have this little grebe sink, 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 sink. And sometimes they'll just stay there with their little eyes and like maybe some of their beak out of the water. And they'll just be watching you from this half sunken position just to see what you're about. And then, oh, nope, gonna go to another part of the wetland where they'll do the reverse. They'll slowly come up, make sure the coast is clear, and if the coast isn't clear, they'll just go spend more time underwater. So they're quite a secretive grebe. So this is one where it's really useful to learn the vocalizations, because they can be tough to see, and they just don't like people so much. You'll find them in wetlands with emergent vegetation and open water that's deep enough for them to dive, but they don't need to be massive wetlands necessarily. You can find them on relatively small bodies, but they do need to be deep enough for them to make, fishing dives. They do, dive and eat opportunistically. So fish, crustaceans, aquatic insects and larvae, leeches, amphibians, kind of anything that they can get their little beaks on. They also have little kids that have those beautiful stripy pajamas, maybe not quite as sleek as the redneck grebe. And they've got two pretty common calls. The first one is called the ow hoop call, and this can be quite variable, and the track I'm going to play shows a fair bit of that variation in the call, and they can do parts of this or the whole sequence. So we'll play the ow hoop call. That's another one that travels a fair distance. And the ooh, excuse me, sip of water. The hyena call is one that's a little bit quieter, and they'll often do this as a pair, and it sounds like kind of hyenas laughing. So that's the hyena call, and they'll often do it as a pair together. Let's play the owl hoop call one more time. So it often starts off and it has a little bit of a buildup, then some really excited ow hoops, and usually it kind of tapers off and gets a little bit slower and slower. And they also do have their own ceremonies. They have some advertising, these little triumph ceremonies where they parallel swim together. And another part of the triumph ceremony, the male grows taller and the female grows shorter. Then they'll pirouette, so they'll kind of bump chests and cross bills and spin around together. Um, then they'll do a rigid pointing down posture. They're really cute little birds if you ever get the chance to watch them and they allow you to observe them. And they have an America-wide distribution, so you can find these guys all across the Americas. Not in the Amazonian basin so much, but you can find them in a fair number of places along the Americas. Okay, now we've got a couple of shorebirds coming up. The first is the ubiquitous killdeer. This is a small shorebird of the plover variety. It's got a short, straight bill, a long tail, and it's got a bit of a pigeon-like head. I think everybody's familiar with what a pigeon looks like, and plovers tend to have that kind of rounded head and a short kind of little bill to them. Both sexes look the same. It's a pretty easy one tonight. So they're solid brown above, white below, and this double breast band is really going to be the thing to clue in on for the killdeer. There's other plover species out there, but the killdeer is the only one with that double breast band. They have a rusty rump, so that's the area on the bird's back, kind of just above where the tail is. And this can be seen during the distraction display, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And they do have this kind of reddish eye ring, so that's just reddish flesh around the eye. And the way I remember them, or when I was starting to learn, is that the killdeer, its name is killdeer, and it looks like almost like it's got a target when you're seeing the bird from head on. So you can imagine those circular rings around it forming a target. And this bird is common throughout the province, throughout Canada, in fields, mudflats, lawns, gravel parking lots. It really does tolerate humans quite well and isn't shy to be nesting, sometimes in very inconvenient locations. If you have a gravel parking lot that maybe part of it isn't very used, sometimes they will set up shop and just go ahead and nest right there. So sometimes you'll see people will put some flagging around so that no one drives over the killdeer nest. They are quite good parents. If you get too close to their nest or their young, the adult is going to do what's known as a distraction display. So you can see that lovely kind of rusty reddish rump there, and they'll act like they have a broken wing. They will fan their tail out, and they'll just be like an injured bird, and they will slowly lead you away from the area where their nest or their young are. So basically they're saying to a predator, hey, I'm a big injured bird, I'm a juicy snack, oh, follow me over here. Once they have led you a distance away, whatever they deem suitable, they will stop the act. They will, not have a broken wing, they won't be fanning their tail, and they'll take off and fly away. And hopefully they will have, distracted the predator enough that maybe, they've either lost the scent of the nest or the eggs, or the chicks, or they've forgotten about them entirely. So that's what they do to distract from their incredibly cute chicks. Shorebirds just have adorable chicks that often just look like little cotton balls on toothpick legs. If you ever get the chance to see baby killdeer or baby shorebirds of any kind, just know that they are painfully cute, and it's okay to go aw. Their eggs really do look like rocks, so they're, you know, they're naturally made to be quite indistinguishable from a lot of that rocky, pebbly marsh edge substrate. So if they do have a nest, and you do see a killdeer leading you away, just be very, very careful about where you're walking, because it can be incredibly easy to step on those eggs. And the parents will let you know. They're incredibly vocal birds. They will try their best to get you away from there. For diet, these guys kind of chase, they probe, and what's cute is that they will do a little bit of foot tapping. So they'll either do this on the grass or in some shallows and some mud, and they will kind of vibrate one of their feet in the hopes of disturbing, whatever invertebrates to come out of their little hiding holes, and they'll snatch them up. On land, they eat a lot of terrestrial invertebrates, everything from earthworms, insects and their larvae, especially grasshoppers and beetles and snails. They'll also eat seeds of some plants and also aquatic invertebrates, because they do straddle that intermediate zone. You'll find them in the shallows of wetlands. You'll also find them in a little bit of upland habitat. And killdeer will definitely let you know that they're in the area. They're very, very vocal birds, and the name actually comes from the noise that they make. So they have a killdeer, killdeer call. And I'm going to guess that a fair number of people are familiar with this. Let's play the killdeer call. So that is the killdeer call, aptly named. And again, this is one that we're going to see across North America, especially in Canada in the breeding season. The American avocet is another showy shorebird. It is a large shorebird. It's got a long, thin, upturned bill, which is more curved in the female. So this picture on the top of the screen is going to be a female, and the ones on the bottom are most likely males, with kind of slightly straighter bill. They've got a long neck, and they've got very long, very bluish legs. It's kind of like a powdery blue if you see them at the height of the breeding season. Both sexes are going to have this kind of rusty salmon colored wash on the head and neck. Otherwise, they're very boldly patterned, black and white. You will find this bird in shallow ephemeral wetlands, in salty wetlands, and in the shallows of larger wetlands. They really do like that kind of shallow wetland environment. And they don't do terribly well when a lot of shallow wetlands are tilled under. So those shallow wetlands are incredibly important, especially on the prairie ecosystem. They use that nice long curved bill to swish a fair bit. They'll do that in water. They'll move their bill side to side and snatch up any invertebrates. They'll also pick invertebrates out of sediment. So, this is a lot of insects and larvae and crustaceans. They'll also eat a little bit of aquatic plant seeds and small fish. Like a lot of things, they're gonna, eat a lot of what they come across, especially during the breeding season when they're, again, needing to put on calories to make eggs, or to feed their chicks, or, to help guide their chicks to important food. They do make a distinct pleek, pleek, pleek noise, but mostly you're going to be identifying this bird visually, because they do make themselves, quite seen. They're not going to be hiding in the wetland edges or anything. So here's that pleek, pleek, pleek. Okay, that's the American avocet. You'll often hear that in the distance, and then you'll look over and see that it's the avocet. This is definitely a Western and Central North American species. So come on out and visit us if you are tuning in from somewhere outside the prairie region. And last but not least for the birds, we have the black-necked stilt. This is another really elegant, bold shorebird. It's medium size. It's going to be smaller than the American avocet. It's got a straight, kind of needle-like long bill. It's got another long neck, and it's got these just absurdly long bubblegum pink legs. Both sexes are black above and white below with a white eyebrow. And the females, I actually just learned this, are going to be slightly tinged brown. So in this photo, you can see it's a female because that brown is slightly different than the black of the rest of the body, but especially at a distance, both sexes are going to look pretty black above and white below. This is another bird of the shallow ephemeral wetlands, salty wetlands, and shallows of larger wetlands, but they do tend to like areas with a bit more vegetation than your American avocet. This is another picker species. They're going to be eating invertebrates, so insects, larvae, crustaceans, small fish, and small frogs if they can. On the left-hand side here, if you ever wonder how they manage with those really long legs, they look pretty awkward sitting down. But they'll also brood their young under their feathers, so they'll fluff them out, and their kids will, tuck up under so that they can stay warm. And this is a great little series of photos here. So we've got little young stilts. In the next photo here, they're all kind of under the parent, and just all you see these little legs sticking out from the belly of the stilt. I just think it's hilarious. It's a pretty beautiful looking bird, quite striking. It's not something that you're going to be confusing it with, and it's not something that is really super easily identifiable by the sound, but we'll play it anyway. It does kind of a yap, 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 but focus on the visual ID for this species. And what's interesting is that if you look at a range map of the black-necked stilt, they haven't really been updated in a little bit. And in the last, especially 10 years, they've really expanded into Alberta and Saskatchewan. So here, this is the classic range map. You can see we've got some in Montana as the closest, but it's not really showing in Canada at all. However, this is a map of observations that we have in our system from nature counts. We just finished a breeding bird atlas in Saskatchewan, and we mapped a whole lot more black-necked stilts than we expected to find breeding all over the place. So they're getting more of a stronghold in Alberta, but they're definitely spilling over quite a fair bit into Saskatchewan these days. So it's really interesting to just see those expansions that happen. So the black-necked stilt is one of those species undergoing an expansion. And last but not least, we have the northern leopard frog. This is a large frog, 11 centimeters or 4 1/3 inch, and another one of those species where the body color itself ranges a fair bit, so from green to brown, but it's covered in these large rounded spots that are bordered by a lighter ring. So it's kind of got those leopard-like spots. So bold spots, lighter ring around them, you're going to be having your northern leopard frog. The western boreal and prairie populations are listed as special concern because of the loss of wetlands that occurs on the prairies. And the sound is kind of like rubbing two balloons together, or if you've ever been around small children, sometimes they make weird throat noises that they discover they can make, kind of like a wah noise. The northern leopard frog kind of sounds like that. So let's have a listen. It's that balloons rubbing together part. So that is the northern leopard frog. Okay, let's go over quickly those bird sounds we heard today. We've got the toots and tent zipper of the northern pintail. The American coot makes a lot of kind of burry hiccups and pop noises. And it's kind of like our swamp chicken. The redneck grebe does a whinny braying noise. It's kind of like, laughing at a distance. The piebald grebe does an ow whoop call. and it also does a hyena call. That one's often much quieter. The killdeer is a very noisy bird that's going to be saying its name, killdeer, killdeer. The American avocet goes pleek, pleek, pleek. And the stilt does some kind of yappy noises. And again, for those last two, definitely focus on the visual ID. They're way more seen than they are heard. And our frog sounds like balloons rubbing together or kids doing that strange throat call. This can be quite a large frog when you do see it. See a wide variety of sizes, but the adults get to be quite large, unlike the other species that we saw. So those are our species for today. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. Here's my contact information. You can reach out to Birds Canada as well on all of our socials and our website. Thank you to our supporters, the Manitoba Fish and Wildlife Enhancement Fund, as well as the Government of Canada for sponsoring this work.